The holographic diagram collapsed into glowing shards as the instructor snapped his claws for attention. "Nothing survives terminal velocity," Vorokesh announced, standing tall at the front of the amphitheater. His crest flared with certainty, and his mandible-free face twisted in what passed for academic satisfaction. Not even apex species. Rows of alien cadets, some upright, others coiled or perched, depending on their physiology, nodded in unison. Styluses scratched against digital tablets. The laws of physics were absolute, unyielding, and most importantly understood. In the back row, a lone human lifted a hand. "Define survives," Elias Ward said, voice low but clear. A few students chuckled. Someone clicked their throat vents in amusement. A gelatinous species near the center of the room shimmered with pale blue mockery. The question was a joke. It had to be. But the wall-mounted medical scanner didn't laugh. It pinged. Loudly. The display beside the instructor lit up with a pulse of red and orange. Diagnostic overlays expanded from Elias Ward's Academy intake profile. Bone density scans, impact trauma maps, healing timelines. A full skeletal reconstruction hovered in the air, revealing fractures and scarred calcifications along both legs, his left shoulder, and 3 ribs. Highlighted in crimson were microfractures that formed a pattern unmistakably associated with high-velocity impacts. Vorokesh turned slowly. "This should be fatal," he muttered, and then louder, more accusatory, "Mr. Ward, how did this happen?" Elias swallowed. His jaw flexed slightly before he answered. "It was." Every cadet turned toward him. Silence fell over the room, thick and expectant. The lights dimmed momentarily, as if the academy itself had paused to listen. And deep beneath the tower, in the unlit levels of the campus infrastructure, motion sensors flickered to life. One after another. Something was moving upward, slow and deliberate. Back in the lecture hall, Vorokesh advanced on Elias. "Approach the podium, now." Elias didn't argue. He stepped forward, shoulders squared but not defiant. The scanner recalibrated to his proximity, displaying new overlays that pulsed with updated metrics. The medical AI spoke aloud. Subject recovery period, 49 Earth hours. Trauma origin, unknown. Healing rate, anomalous. The skeletal projection spun, zoomed in on the femur. Bone density exceeds standard for human, Class 3. Fracture sites demonstrate non-linear mineral regrowth. The instructor narrowed his eyes. "You claim to have survived a terminal fall?" Elias shrugged. "I'm standing here." A cadet with a coiled exoskeleton raised one arm. Was he augmented? Earth is known for their surgical implants. "Negative," replied the AI. "No cybernetic enhancements present. No evidence of recent surgery." A tall, feathered student hissed from the upper tier. "Then it must be a lie." Vorokesh turned to Elias again. "State the circumstances of your injury." Elias hesitated. "I was on a mission, Kirin 7. Storm front blew in while I was on rappel. Winds tore the tether. I dropped." The instructor made a sharp gesture. "Dropped from what height?" "Not sure. A cliff face. Cloud cover was dense. No visibility." "And you impacted what?" "Not the ground." More murmuring. A few cadets tilted their heads in disbelief. "Something else," Elias continued. "Something was falling with me. I remember the noise, the shape, but the rest is fragments. I shouldn't be alive, but I am." Vorokesh flicked his secondary limbs dismissively. "This is anecdote, and incomplete. We require empirical validation." Another cadet chimed in. "Have him replicate it. Use the tower." Elias's eyes snapped to them, alarm in his gaze for the first time. That evening, he was escorted without permission to the Academy's vertical wind tunnel tower. A colossal structure that stretched from the lower crust of the planetary facility up through the artificial atmosphere. It was designed for velocity simulations, pressure testing, and high-risk physical evaluations. A crowd of cadets and instructors had gathered on the upper deck. "Just a jump," Vorokesh said, gesturing toward the jump platform. "Not happening," Elias replied, backing away from the edge. "You want proof? Read the scans again." Yitra Den, a senior xenobiologist, hovered forward. Her translucent form shimmered in the low light, limbs like antennae extended with cautious interest. A synthesized voice projected from a translator orb beside her. "Mr. Ward, this test could advance our understanding of human resilience by centuries." "I'm not afraid of the fall," Elias said quietly. Yitra paused. The orb buzzed. "Then what?" "It's what might come with it." The statement puzzled the gathering. Cadets looked to one another, uncertain. Below them, in the lower shaft of the tower, a maintenance drone blinked online without command. It hovered awkwardly, lights scanning the tunnel walls. Something moved past it. Too fast? Too wrong? The drone spun in confused circles and then shorted out. The shaft sensors lit up with proximity alerts. Motion was climbing, not falling. Against all airflow. Against every model of resistance. "Impossible," murmured Vorokesh. Elias took a step back from the display. "No, not impossible. Just not in your textbooks." On the observation screen, a shadow emerged, a form that didn't match any known species. Gangly limbs, flexible vertebrae, a suggestion of eyes that glowed faintly. The silhouette moved unnaturally, gripping the smooth shaft wall, ignoring the simulated hurricane-level wind being pushed down against it. Vorokesh issued a security command: "Seal the platform, increase shaft pressure." "It won't help," Elias whispered. The creature accelerated. Then it burst through the top vent. Gasps and screams filled the air. The thing was tall, uneven, sinewy, in a way that defied skeletal logic. It emitted no sound, just movement, purposeful, predatory. It locked onto Elias. Elias didn't hesitate. He moved, not to fight but to redirect. As it lunged, he rotated his center of mass and shifted his stance in a way that diverted the creature's momentum sideways. The entity crashed into the reinforced wall. It recoiled, dazed. Then it vanished into the upper vents, evaporating from view as suddenly as it had appeared. The cadets were silent. No one knew what to say. Vorokesh broke the stillness. What in the name of conservation law was that? Elias stood still for a long moment, staring into the dark gap where the creature had disappeared. "I don't know, but it fell with me." Far below them, sensors started lighting up again. The Academy, once confident in its understanding of gravity, inertia, and impact, now realized it had overlooked a critical variable. Survival isn't just about falling. It's about what falls with you and what comes back. And Elias Ward had returned with something physics couldn't explain. The Academy denied everything. Officially, the event in the wind tunnel tower was logged as a high-pressure systems fault and a drone misfire. The tower was sealed for recalibration, the logs encrypted, and the footage archived in a secure partition available only to senior staff. But no amount of official silence could smother the murmur of fear that now drifted through the Helian Interdisciplinary Academy like charged air before a lightning strike. In the following days, classrooms were half full. Cadets who once boasted about vacuum jumps and plasma burns now avoided the tower entirely. Vorokesh did not return to advanced kinetics. A temporary replacement took his place, a soft-spoken Lystari who refused to acknowledge what had happened and changed the curriculum to the far safer topic of low-gravity material fatigue. Elias Ward was no longer just the human, he was the incident. And everyone, students, faculty, staff, watched him with attention they didn't understand. Elias had not returned to his assigned dorm. After the tower, the medical wing had kept him overnight for observation. That became 2 nights, then 3. On the 4th, he was relocated to an auxiliary suite inside the xenophysiology wing. They told him it was for privacy. He knew better. The new room had no windows, the bed retracted into the wall. 3 separate surveillance nodes were mounted in the corners, designed to look like innocuous diagnostics. He didn't comment on them. He didn't sleep much anyway. Every night, between 2 and 3 hours after lights out, the hum in the walls would shift pitch. The air vents would grow unnaturally cold. Sometimes, the motion sensors in the floor beneath his room would activate briefly, just a flicker, like something had passed through too fast to be logged properly. Elias learned not to ask the staff about it. They wouldn't say anything, and most of them wouldn't even look him in the eye anymore. Subject demonstrates resilience. Read one of the daily logs he wasn't meant to see. but psychological deterioration is probable. He agreed with half of that. The tests continued. Yitra Den oversaw most of them now. Though she still spoke through her floating orb translator, her tone had changed. Less clinical, more careful. She no longer addressed Elias as subject. She called him Mr. Ward, and she began to ask questions that sounded less like diagnostics and more like conversation. What do you remember about the fall? Elias stared at the rotating model of his own skeleton above the desk. Not much. Anything unusual? Everything. Yitra waited. Elias shifted in his seat. It wasn't the impact. That wasn't the worst part. She tilted slightly in the air. Then what was? I wasn't alone. She gave no reply, but the orb dimmed for a moment. That thing, Elias said, it wasn't just falling with me. It was moving, changing position. I couldn't see it, not exactly, but I could feel it tracking me. Like it knew the vectors, knew how I was trying to adjust for drag, and it adjusted too. Yitra's limbs paused mid-air. The orb gave a soft tone. You believe it was intelligent? I don't know what I believe, Elias said. I just know it's not gone. The next day, Yitra increased the monitoring field in the sublevels. She didn't tell anyone why. That night, at precisely 2:47 Standard Time, Sublevel 4's environmental sensors recorded a localized temperature drop of 9 degrees in under 6 seconds. No movement registered. No personnel were scheduled in that wing. 2 minutes later, Elias's surveillance feed captured him sitting upright in bed, staring at the far wall. He didn't move for 12 minutes. He didn't blink. When reviewed the following morning, the footage appeared corrupted, partially scrambled with static distortions. The timestamps were intact. But during the 12 minutes, Elias stared at the wall. A flickering shadow occasionally crossed his reflection in the surface of the diagnostic terminal across from his bed. No one could identify it. And Elias never mentioned it. By the end of the week, the phenomenon was no longer limited to Elias's vicinity. In the Eastern Research Tower, a senior propulsion engineer reported hearing impacts in the elevator shaft when no car was in motion. In the cadet dormitory, a Kavari student suffered what the medical team called a transient psychological disruption after seeing something crawl across the ceiling and vanish into a wall vent. The sightings followed no pattern except one. They always occurred after Elias had fallen asleep. Yitra met with the Academy's security director, a quadrupedal being named Resnin, who had once served in conflict zones across 3 systems. You believe this is connected to the human's fall? Resnin asked, his voice low and distorted by the translator mesh mounted to his lower jaw. Yitra's orb pulsed. I believe the thing in the shaft is not a new occurrence. I believe it came with him, or followed him. Resnin stared at her. Then why is he still here? Because removing him would not remove the threat, she said, and because no one knows more about surviving it than he does. Resnin didn't like the answer. Elias wasn't aware of the meeting. He spent most of that day in the Academy's motion lab, being asked to reenact fall simulations with sensors attached to every joint. He hated it. Not because it hurt, but because none of the simulations captured what mattered. You're measuring bones, he muttered at one point, when you should be measuring instincts. Clarify, said the technician, adjusting a cranial rig. Elias shook his head. Forget it. The lab lights flickered. It only lasted a second, but the techs froze. The instruments reset. One of the side monitors showed a diagnostic spike brief, sharp, like a localized EM surge. That night, Elias didn't try to sleep. He sat upright, awake, fully dressed, waiting. At 2:41, the room's temperature dropped. He heard it not a noise exactly, but a distortion, a warping of the air itself, like the sound gravity might make if it stopped pretending to obey. He didn't move. The walls seemed to stretch. A shadow pooled near the ceiling vent. The sensors didn't activate, but he felt it, closer than it had ever been. He whispered, barely audible. You remember me, don't you? The shadow rippled. It moved toward him. Elias didn't run. He stood, slow and deliberate. His posture shifted, weight favoring his back leg, like he was about to pivot. He remembered this feeling, the helpless plunge, the freezing certainty that something else was falling faster, guiding its descent to intercept him. His hands opened, Not in defense, but in timing. The shadow lunged. Elias dropped, rolled, came up behind it, using the same redirection he'd used in the tower. This time, it didn't vanish. It crashed into the diagnostic table. The wall shuddered. The lights flared white. Security burst in. By the time they entered, the room was empty. No sign of the creature. No sign of impact. Only Elias, sitting on the floor, breathing hard. His shoulder was bleeding. The Academy didn't issue a report, but the fear had metastasized. It wasn't a mystery anymore. It was a presence. And Elias wasn't its target. He was its unfinished task. The Academy tried to adapt, but adaptation, Elias noticed, was not the same as understanding. New policies arrived in the form of revised schematics. Ventilation routes were rerouted through sealed conduits. Sensor thresholds were recalibrated. The number of patrol drones tripled overnight, buzzing like oversized insects through the corridors. But none of it made anyone feel safer. If anything, it proved how afraid the administration had become. Rumors spread faster than orders. Some cadets believed the Academy was haunted. Others believed Elias had brought something back from a forbidden zone. The more grounded insisted it was a rogue simulation construct, something birthed from corrupted training software and now manifesting in real space. None of them were right. None of them were entirely wrong either. Elias kept to himself, not by choice, but by necessity. His presence in any classroom now triggered whispered debates or sudden silence. Even the instructors stopped asking for his participation. He didn't blame them. No one wanted the thing that stalked him to notice them instead. Only Yitra Den remained constant. Her presence was a cold comfort, but a genuine one. She never treated him like a problem to be solved. She watched. She listened. She logged. And she kept the security board at bay. On the 7th day since the wind tunnel event, the board called an emergency assembly. The room was circular, lined with low-gravity seats and armored windows. A full holographic reconstruction of the facility rotated slowly above the center console. Security Director Resnan stood at the edge, forelimbs braced against the data table. "This," he said, gesturing to a flickering section of the lower training tower, "is the path it's using. Every recorded anomaly tracks back to these shafts." Yitra's orb hovered beside him. No visual confirmation. "No clean visual confirmation," Resnan corrected. "We've got heat trails, pressure shifts, brief silhouettes." And Elias Ward? "Always nearby, always asleep." "Not this time," she said. He was awake. He engaged it. Resnan rotated one of the holographic layers, zooming in on the diagnostic suite. There was damage, physical impact. We verified it. Table was dented, wall panel misaligned. But the creature left no residue, no traceable mass. If this were a creature, we'd have DNA. If this were energy, we'd have readings. "It's something else," Yitra said softly. Resnan leaned back. "Or, it's Elias." The room was silent for a moment. Yitra's limbs extended with slow deliberation. "If it were Elias, Director, then we would all be dead already." That ended the meeting. But not the fear. Elias wasn't told about the assembly. He didn't need to be. He could feel the change in the air. Cadets no longer avoided him out of discomfort. They avoided him out of self-preservation. One evening, while crossing between the motion lab and the dining quadrant, he overheard two instructors arguing quietly in an empty corridor. "We can't contain it if we don't understand it." "Then isolate the variable." "You mean the human?" "Call it what you want." Elias didn't confront them. He walked past like he hadn't heard. But when he returned to his suite that night, he packed a small bag. Just essentials. Water, a compression bandage, a second skin thermosuit, and a micro-beacon. He wasn't waiting to be isolated. He was going to find it himself. That night, he didn't sleep. At 2:33, he stepped into the access lift and descended past sublevel 4, past the medical layers, past even the maintenance decks. He bypassed security checkpoints using the override code Yitra had quietly left in his file. She hadn't said anything aloud, but she had given him the option. The shaft shuddered as the lift passed into the geothermal zones. The lighting flickered to an emergency hue, blue-white, sterile, and sharp. No one was authorized down here. Elias keyed open the first hatch, and stepped into the lower tower infrastructure. Silence. Not the silence of absence. The silence of something listening. His boots pressed into the grating floor, careful and deliberate. Around him, the walls were layered with ductwork and support pylons. No decorative panels, no smooth alloys, just raw structure. He moved deeper. The deeper he went, the more wrong the air felt. The temperature was inconsistent, hot one moment, freezing the next. Humidity spiked and dropped in erratic patterns. The walls trembled softly, as if the academy itself was breathing through shallow lungs. Then he saw the first mark. A long gouge, low on the wall, cutting across a pipe like it had been sliced with surgical precision. He crouched, ran a hand along it. The metal hadn't been torn. It had been melted, then cooled instantly. No tool Elias knew could do that without leaving a heat trace. Yet the surface was ice cold. He stood. Something scraped far ahead. A metallic shift, almost delicate. Elias adjusted his footing, rolled his shoulders. He didn't call out. He knew it was already aware of him. He followed the sound. Down a narrow access tunnel, then into a wide shaft lined with fan housings. The fans were motionless. He paused beside one and pressed a hand to the housing. It vibrated. Not from machinery. From something inside. His fingers tightened. Then he heard it. The breathing. Not loud, not labored, but unmistakably real. Inhale, exhale. Too rhythmic for a leak. Too organic for a malfunction. He backed away slowly. A shadow passed behind the fan blades. Then another. And then the metal warped just a little, just enough to betray the thing pushing against it. It was still adapting to the environment. Still learning the layout. Still evolving. Elias didn't run. He did something stranger. He sat, cross-legged, in the middle of the floor, and waited. The fan blades shuddered once more, and the thing peeled itself through, step by step, limb by impossible limb. It had grown. Not just in size, in definition. It was more solid now, less like a distortion, more like a creature finding its shape. Two eyes locked onto him. They didn't glow. They reflected. Elias exhaled. "I'm not going to fight you." The creature froze. "I think you know that. I think you remember." Its head tilted. "You're not a hunter," Elias said, his voice low. "You're a passenger." The creature's chest rose and fell once heavier now, more like lungs than energy. "You fell with me because you couldn't stay there. You latched onto me because I was leaving." It twitched. "You didn't survive the fall," Elias continued. "You survived the host." The silence deepened. Then, slowly, the creature stepped closer. Elias didn't move. It leaned forward close enough that the heat from its form met the cold of his skin. And in that moment, Elias understood. It wasn't hunting him. It was mirroring him. Learning. Becoming. And it hadn't finished falling yet. Not completely. Not alone. The emergency klaxon was quiet at first. More of a chime than a true alarm, an automated courtesy, the Academy's way of pretending it still controlled the situation. But as the alert repeated itself across systems, frequencies, and floors, it grew louder, sharper, urgent. Unauthorized presence in geothermal maintenance corridor. The announcement echoed through the halls, bouncing off metal and polyglass, reverberating up through ducts and shafts. Faculty doors opened. Cadets emerged from quarters, brows furrowed, eyes wary. No one said what they were thinking, but they all thought the same thing. Elias Ward had gone below, and the thing had followed. Yitra Den reached the diagnostic suite before the others. Elias's room was empty, the bed undisturbed. The surveillance node had recorded 12 minutes of footage before corrupting again. It showed him sitting still, breathing slowly, then standing and exiting with calm, deliberate motion. She knew what that meant. He hadn't been taken. He'd gone willingly. By the time she reached the command center, Resnan was already issuing lockdowns. Seal sublevels 5 through 12. Divert internal security to shaft 6. Yitra hovered beside him. "You'll trap him down there." Resnan didn't look up from the interface. "That's the idea. He's not the threat." "We don't know that." "I do." He stopped, finally meeting her gaze. "You're speaking like he's part of it." "He isn't," Yitra said, "but he's the only one it doesn't treat as prey." Resnan hesitated for just a moment too long. Then he turned back to the terminal. "Then let's hope he stays that way." Beneath them, beyond the reach of cameras and consensus reality, Elias stood motionless in the geothermal bay. The creature crouched in front of him, its shape flickering. Not glitching, not unstable, just not settled. It had no mouth, yet he understood it. Not with words. With pressure. With posture. It had adapted to survive a fall by mirroring a species that survived things it shouldn't. And now it was evolving further. Its shape was becoming more human. Elias stepped closer. "You don't belong in a facility," he said quietly. "You weren't made for walls." The creature twitched, whether in agreement or recoil, he couldn't tell. "You don't hunt, you react. Every movement you made was a reflection. You didn't climb after me in the tower to attack me. You followed because I moved first." The creature's body seemed to blur, then reform. "You didn't break physics," Elias said. "You read it differently." The geothermal structure around them pulsed with heat. Pipes groaned. A vent released a burst of steam. Lights along the ceiling dimmed. Above, the command center detected an energy spike. "Localized distortion forming at corridor junction gamma," reported an analyst. "Unknown field, non-radiative, but dense." Resnan leaned over the console. "Seal it off." "We can't," the analyst said. "It's not expanding through the corridor. It's generating through Elias Ward." In the geothermal chamber, Elias exhaled. He could feel the pressure behind his eyes. Not pain, something deeper, resonance. The creature's head tilted again. This time, it matched him completely. Shoulders squared, back straight, legs adjusted into a posture identical to his. He could see it now how it had used him to survive the fall. It had no mass of its own in the conventional sense. It needed something with physical structure to attach to, a shape to mimic, a frame to ride. On Kirin 7, it had latched onto the first form it recognized, falling with purpose. Him? And now, it was no longer a passenger. It was preparing to become permanent. Elias stepped back. "You don't understand what this place is," he said. "You think I'm a vessel, but I'm not. I'm a warning." The creature twitched. The mimicry faltered. "I didn't survive terminal velocity because I'm indestructible," he continued. "I survived because I did something no simulation accounts for." The creature stilled, watching. "I gave up control." He raised his arms slightly, fingers relaxed. "I let the fall happen. I accepted it. You didn't. You tried to guide it, and that's why you needed me." He stepped forward again. "But you don't need me anymore, do you?" The creature stood perfectly still. The heat around it dropped. Its outline sharpened. Elias nodded slowly. "Then this is where we part." He pulled a small object from his belt, something Yitra had given him days earlier, a molecular delay charge, meant for reactive stasis. "I'm not your host." He pressed the activation node. The air imploded silently. The creature flinched, then reeled back as the charge activated. A radius of gravitational tension erupted around them, dense enough to slow molecular kinetics, but narrow enough not to damage the core systems. The creature spasmed. Its form began to unravel, patterns twitching as it attempted to stabilize. "I'm your final trajectory," Elias whispered. He stepped back into the field, closer to it than anyone else could survive. But this time, he was prepared. The pressure took hold. His muscles screamed, bones trembled under the force. He didn't stop. The creature tried to mirror again, tried to stand like him, breathe like him, but its form stuttered. The mimicry failed. And with a final burst of static light, it collapsed inward, like a wave that had misunderstood the shape of the shore. Then, silence. The field dissolved. The geothermal lights stabilized. Elias collapsed to one knee, coughing. Above, in the command center, alarms went quiet. No further anomalies. No motion. No heat spikes. No distortions. Resnan stared at the report in stunned silence. Yitra didn't celebrate. She just closed her eyes. When recovery teams reached Elias, he was alive. Exhausted, dehydrated, burned along one side of his body from feedback exposure, but alive. He refused a stretcher. Instead, as he limped up the corridor toward the lift, he asked one question. Does the Academy still teach that nothing survives terminal velocity? The recovery tech stared at him, unsure how to respond. Elias smiled, worn, quiet, but present. Update the syllabus. In the days that followed, the incident was logged, debated, classified, and finally edited down to a footnote in the Academy's central archive. The official report listed it as a localized gravitational anomaly encountered during human cadet resilience testing. Unofficially, the physics department rewrote a key passage in their kinetic theory modules. Terminal velocity is not a fixed threshold, it is a contextual phenomenon. Survival is not always a product of design. Sometimes it is a function of intention. And on a note scrawled into the margin of one instructor's lecture script, just above the formula for inertial drag and impact spread, someone had written in neat Terran handwriting, "Define survives." The instructor didn't erase it. No one ever did.